Welcome back to another Paintman Journeying video. However, this one is not going to be like the others. It's going to be a test, an experiment, if you will. For a while now, I've wanted to try a new format. There are many good painters out there, especially on YouTube, offering a lot of the same advice that I do. So it's hard to stand out among them. But what I haven't seen is what I'm going to be trying with you today. When I look at a model while I'm painting it, in the silence, I sometimes think about who this model is, what stories they will have. What stories do they have? Well, what if I gave them a story? I'll be painting this skeleton commander for you today. He's from the Vampiric Undead from this December's One Page Rules Patreon. He's not the only model, of course. There's also skeleton guardians, zombie wolves, a necromancer, and the maiden chariot. I am cutting it a little close this month, so there's only a few more days to get all these and more on the One Page Rules Patreon, but of course they will be available on my mini factory should you have missed them. But today we're going to focus on this one, this skeleton. The idea is that while I show you my painting process for him, instead of my normal narration, I've narrated a short story about this model. So please join me for my first ever Paintman Journeying adventure. I've entitled this one, Memories from an Empty Head. The skeletal champion thought to himself while he looked on at the battle going on in front of him. The magic that animates him doesn't always give him the benefits of a memory, like what his name was, where he was from, or even how he died. His remains have been in service so long, he doesn't even remember when he was reanimated. So it was weird for him to suddenly get a memory like this.
Was it that tree? No. It was that one.
As he looks out over the terrain, all he can see through the magical glow that animates where his eyes would have been is a monochrome landscape with a slight red tint. Movement of the living souls of their enemies, a rare, colorful addition to that vision, a ghostly teal marking for him the targets of his masters.
Over there, by that ridge. Was that?
As those memories come slowly back to him, the vision changes. Even those teals now disappearing from view, like they usually do when they've killed the enemy. But he can hear the battle still going on, so it wasn't that this time.
Yes, I see it now.
His aloof demeanor changes suddenly as he turns to his skeletal soldiers that were standing back from the front line with him, pointing to one unit, then to a spot on the battlefield, ordering them into the fray. Fodder, for he cared not for them, but the skeletons that he kept with him, these were his best. So without an utterance, he only motioned for them to follow by crooking a bony finger towards himself as he turned to walk. The unit he had sent forward worked as a perfect distraction to any human soldiers on this flank of the field, so that his inspection of the tree he saw earlier could go unnoticed. From its branches he saw a rope with a noose dangling from it, empty, as though it hadn't been used in a long time.
Yes, this one, our resurrection,
he said out loud this time, as the memories he was experiencing were only allowing him to see small pieces of the puzzle. There was something about this tree he knew. Not about the tree itself, it was nothing special, but of the land around it. The skeleton champion took the time to look around as his retinue crouched still and silent out of view of the battle raging on the peripheral, using the tree as cover. It didn't take him much time to spot what he was looking for, as he jumped down from a root that had breached the surface of the mud around the tree, landing in a small carved-out trench, not even a foot deep. From the trench, he looked out over the land and saw craters, slightly sunken spots in the ground, now covered with field grass, but craters nonetheless, leading all the way to the back of the other army's position. He popped his head up over the route to give his retinue a slight sideways nod of his head, ordering them to follow him. They crouched down low into the trench and slowly walked across it until they got to its end. How? The skeleton thought to himself, as he knew if they tried to run for the next crater, they'd be spotted from their movement. Soon, though, the answer came rushing back as another memory as he heard the loud screech of a bat beast that was either in the middle of happily killing or was being killed itself. It didn't matter, as he lunged out of the shallow trench and ran crouched to the next shallow crater. His unit followed quickly behind. It took them only a few seconds to make it across. Once in the crater, they lay down on its sloped face, closest to the battle, so that the grass and the angle covered them from view. Now all they had to do was wait. Each of the retinue understood in silence. As he lay there and wait, the skeletal champion wondered about the shallow craters, about the battle that created them. It must have been a long time ago, or they might have been a bit deeper. But why would he remember them at all? Was he in that battle? He pondered to himself. A loud boom from the main field interrupted his thoughts and gave the skeletons another chance to sneak up, which they did with haste to the next dip in the landscape. The humans started to fire their heavy weapons at a zombie dragon that had roared into battle. Perfect, the champion thought, as it would give them much more opportunity to advance. While they waited for the next volley or loud roar or any other surprise that would distract away from their movement, the champion continued to think.
How many battles were fought here?
He wondered to himself, as the overgrowth in the craters had signs of plant life from before even he was reanimated.
Take aim! Fire!
Another shouted order went out, another volley of gunfire. Another dash from the champion and his unit over the field under the cover of the slopes and battle noise. Pretty soon they found themselves behind enemy lines, unspotted by anyone, the smoke from all the gunfire giving them even more cover. The champion looked up the ridge of the final crater, and there he saw a single soul, glowing teal in his vision. It must be his target. It was the enemy commander, his armor and weapons seeming very familiar to the skeleton, those memories standing out to him. He turned to look at his skeletal soldiers. Each of them had weapons unsheathed and each staring at a different enemy soldier. He knew that they, like him, only had one enemy to truly see and were ready to strike. He did not leave them waiting. Without a word, he held his old, chipped and rust-stained sword tight in his skeletal hand, raised himself up, and rushed forward out of the smoke.
Commander, behind you!
He heard one of the living souls shout, but it was too late. His sword had stabbed through his enemy's unguarded back and out his chest, knocking his breastplate off from the force of the thrust. The champion didn't move after that. He just let the commander die slowly upon his sword as he focused on the small memories now filling up his empty skull. He took his hand to his chest, holding it where his rib bones were marked with nicks of a large sword, an injury mirroring the one he just dealt the commander. Eventually he dropped his sword and let it fall, as it was now stuck in the dead commander's body. He looked up and looked around. The large teal blurs of the souls around him started to come into focus. But it wasn't those of the surviving living humans now fighting for their lives from the ambushing undead skeletons. It was those of the skeletons he was with. He could see their faces from when they were alive. Even those undead that were struck down by the Empire soldiers in the melee, he could see their faces too. It was the memories flooding back to him now.
This is where I died.
He looked down at the commander's corpse again.
This is how I died.
His thoughts made him wonder just how many times this scenario has played out. Was he just part of a cycle? Despite his revelation, he still couldn't remember who he was before. But he understood that the skeletons he served with now were the men and women he served with before, in the Empire. The champion crouched down, placing his hand over the dead commander's sword hand.
If only he knew. He could have stopped me.
He thought as he pried the commander's fingers off the sword and grabbed it for himself. Lifting himself up again, readying his new blade, and marching forward with his unit to help end the battle before them.
Good thing I was too dead to tell him.
Since this was my first time trying this, I really want to know what you think. Is it a good format idea? Did you enjoy the story? Did I capture the audiobook feel that I was after? I want all your comments and suggestions, all of them. I wrote this story myself, but I think this would be a great format to also maybe share other writers' short stories, if there's a model to match. And I actually had a lot of fun making it. My normal narration can sometimes be a bit repetitive, so this was a nice writing break. Thanks for coming along on this adventure, and I'll see you next time. If you liked this video, give it a like and check out another video from my channel. Also find a link to my Patreon in the description. It's free to join, and my store has both videos and STLs to further explore your painting journey.